Sure. So ViaCorp is, we develop software for people to do things with online video, for example, primarily video. We also have a big data platform, we have an advertising platform, we have, we can send pretty much any kind of content you want to any device you can think of. Really fundamentally, the way I got started in this business was that I couldn't get into film school, but I just started showing up. And I worked on a lot of films, and then all of my friends from film school graduated, and they were all incredibly talented, but not so good on the organisational side. And so I started organising them, and that was kind of how my career got started. And the same thing applies in software. I'm extremely good at exploiting very creative people in a way that perhaps doesn't make them feel exploited. Now, that's not to say that I don't have lots of ideas, but I look at the process as being very, very collaborative. And I have a rule at work. So you ask me what I do when I come in every day. It varies a little bit, but I do have a rule that anybody who ever works for me, this sounds like I'm actually big noting myself, and it's kind of the opposite of this. It's not about ego. In fact, if I say something galactically stupid, I want the people who work for me to say, that's the biggest load of crap I've heard. Because then we get a kind of a relationship where we can pick up on things and explore things, and working together. Quite often, people will say, I've got this idea or this idea or this idea, and in my role, which is COO, it's really about making sure that all of the risks or all of the things that could go wrong are kind of balanced out, and you only kind of get that through experience, without thinking of, well, what are we going to do with this in a year's time? How would we expand this in a year's time? Or how would we bolt something else onto it? Or how would we repurpose it for something else? And if you ask a software developer, can you do this? It's a bit like asking a gaffer, can you put the light over there? Yeah, you can. You should ask the cinematographer whether it's a good idea to put the light over there. And that kind of collaborative, that getting people to actually communicate properly is probably the essence of what I do. So I try and establish a culture that people can work in which they're not falling over one another or actively undermining one another, or they're all more or less pointed in the same direction. One of the things that I used to do, one of my earlier business was only 12 employees, and we had a great thing there where once a week, somebody out of the team, who just rotated, had to come up with a 3-minute speech. They had to find something that was interesting and talk about it for 3 minutes. I remember in one example, it was something to do with horse racing, and I don't know anything about horse racing. What was interesting about the horse racing thing that the guy talked about was actually to do with the way that the horses were trained, which was the interesting part. And that, as a kind of a fostering people to start thinking about things. If you get outside of your sort of comfort zone, if all you're thinking about is making films, if all you're thinking about is making games, if all you're thinking about is writing software, and you don't have things coming in from outside, then you get into a groupthink, and that's really easy with a really small team. And you've got to avoid the groupthink kind of thing. That if you're managing people, if you set up expectations that they have this great idea, and this is a really big problem in the sort of the 80-20 rule, where companies give somebody 20% of their time to go off and do their own thing. That's great if you can afford to do that. I've seen a lot of companies try that and actually fail. Google actually succeeds at it moderately well, but a lot of companies don't have the backing to do that. You need people working. So you can't just go to people and say, I want all your great ideas, all your IP belongs to us, give me everything out of your brain, and then expect good ideas to just flow from that. A, that is exploitative, and B, asking for people to have ideas if you can't actually execute on them is not, A, it's not fair, and B, it's not good for culture, because then people think, well, gee, I suggested this great idea, but you chose this really boring thing over here. I'm not going to come up with more ideas for you. Most people think that giving a command is, I tell you what to do. And that's absolutely not what giving a command to people is about. If you do that, you'll fail. Because what you have to do is you have to understand that the person who you just asked to do something, first of all, has the skills and the knowledge to execute the thing they've just been asked to do, knows what the expected outcome is, and has an idea of what the fallback is if the expected outcome doesn't happen. You have to be very specific about things. Now, if you're too specific, then all that happens is your idea, not everybody's ideas. There's a happy medium there. Oh, look, I'm a big proponent of the idea of, I think Woody Allen said that, the lovely thing, I'm going to paraphrase here, but the lovely thing about art is the kind of serrated edge. It's very good at cutting through things. And there is definitely something to be said with putting artists together with technologists. Because there is this sort of stereotype of the left brain, right brain, and it's a dumb stereotype. It's a really dumb stereotype. There's a lot of people who are very technological, who are actually very arty, and there's a lot of people who are really into art, who actually, do know their way around a computer. They're not completely computer illiterate. And I think there's definitely something to be said for bringing in people into a technology environment where they are allowed to ask dumb questions. You can bring in people who are very creative, and they're not actually asking dumb questions, they're actually asking really smart questions, but they're asking them from a different direction than people who are perhaps technologists would ask. To try and predict what's going to happen, for example, in media 3 years out, I think is very, very difficult. I don't know what the next Facebook will be, but it's not going to be Facebook. I don't know what the next Twitter will be, but it's not going to be Twitter. And trying to predict those things is very, very challenging. I have to read very widely, so not just academic papers, but I read a lot of, things like magazines like The New Yorker and things like that, where you'll get people who are just looking at anthropology, or what happened in a village in India, or what happened over here, or those sorts of things are good for filtering what you know about technology through what people are doing in odd parts of the world.